Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I am your host, Jay Taylor. Well, I want to take this time to talk a bit about one of the best newsletters there is on geopolitical matters, and that is the Early Warning Report written by Richard Maybury. And I would advise you to go to richardmaybury.com to learn more about this excellent service. And you can also subscribe there. You could also call the number at 800-509-5400, 800-509-5400. I believe the subscription rate is $300 a year or something like that, but when Richard was on this show in the past, he did offer a meaningful discount to my listeners. I'm not sure if that offer still stands, but you might want to ask Richard if you choose to subscribe to this excellent letter. Suffice it to say that if you combine Richard Maybury's early warning report along with the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity, you will be miles ahead of your friends in understanding what is really going on around the world, not only geopolitically, but in the case of Richard's letter, also with the global economy. Richard has a great number of insights into what's happening and why we're having problems in the global economy. But in any event, I think the insights of Richard Maybury are just very, very good as anybody I've seen, and certainly will give you a perspective that is far different from what you're going to hear every day on the mainstream media. So what I want to do in this segment is to highlight some of Richard's insights in both his August and September issues of the Early Warning Report. In the August issue, Richard discussed quantitative easing, and the problem, as Richard points out, is that there's been so much malinvestment over the years that the economic patient needs more and more monetary narcotic administered at a faster and faster pace. Meantime, even with all this narcotic that has been administered at a faster and faster pace, the velocity of money, that is how frequently it turns over, has been reaching historically low levels, much as it did during the 1930s. And this makes a certain amount of sense when you realize that the middle class is becoming increasingly insolvent. So people, rather than spending on things they don't have to have, are holding on to their money longer and simply cannot go out and start spending as they did prior to the 2008-2009. Now, Richard believes that this decline in monetary velocity makes it far less likely that the Fed will truthfully reduce quantitative easing, even though there are members at the Federal Reserve who think that should be done as early as October of this year. Maybury believes the Fed will in fact end quantitative easing only if monetary velocity picks up, and that would make them feel safe to start tightening or to reducing the amount of new monetary narcotic that is administered into the veins of the global economic patient. Otherwise, Maybury points out that if the confidence levels in the economy does not cause people to begin to spend more, Janet Yellen is likely to find reasons to continue pumping monetary narcotic into the veins of the patient, and that would be probably the only way she feels she can go. Otherwise, as Maybury notes, and I quote, if a halt to quantitative easing lasts more than, say, 9 months, I will expect a wave of fear to depress velocity, having a strong deflationary effect. This would lead to some kind of thunderous crash, probably in stocks, real estate, or both, and possibly throughout the entire world financial system. End of quote. What do we do? Maybury asks. Well, he says if he believes that the Fed is in fact triggering a catastrophic decline in the velocity of money, he will advise his subscribers to liquidate and move into cash. And I might add that that is very much what I am looking to do as well. And in fact, I constructed my inflation-deflation model for exactly that purpose, to give me a sense of whether or not the monetary velocity or the turnover of economic activity is increasing or decreasing. It's certainly not a perfect science, but it gives me some sort of a sense, and what I've seen for quite a while now is a sideways movement in spite of huge amounts of trillions of dollars of monetary narcotic being administered to the patient, which I think is attests to the enormous natural deflationary inclination of the economy. So I'm of the belief, I think Richard is too, or that we're likely to see any kind of a curtailment of quantitative easing. In fact, you might see some backdoor monetary stimulation, as some people believe happened recently with Belgium, with huge amounts of treasury buying coming through Belgium at a time when the United States was supposedly reducing quantitative easing. Well, continuing on in the August issue, Richard Maybury says on the topic of inflation, he believes that the perpetual war that America is engaged in is likely to lead to much higher prices, not lower prices, but much, much higher prices, in fact, into the future. And he doesn't give an exact time frame of this, but he suggests that in real 2014 dollars, we'll see the following prices. Oil, $300, gold to over $10,000, silver to over $200, platinum over $10,000, palladium over $5,000. Fidelity Defense, it's an ETF, and Richard is very big in investing in defense stocks, to over $500. It's now around $116. Numismatics, he thinks, will increase by at least 1,000% from where they are now. The Dow Jones Commodity Index, he believes, will go to 2,500. It's now $688. And he believes that U.S. real estate will be up by at least 200%. But again, Richard also thinks that there is a chance we will see a deflationary implosion before prices begin to skyrocket. On China, in August, Maybury made a very interesting comment, and I will quote what he said about China. He says, "Keep an eye on China. Its economy and especially its real estate boom are cooling. In my opinion, China is probably the largest mountain of malinvestment in the world history, and when its shakeout is in full roar, the riots and bloodshed will be astounding. I think there's a strong chance that rulers in Beijing know this, and their recent military actions are attempts to provoke Washington into levying trade restrictions and other burdens which will enable Chinese rulers to blame China's coming economic disaster on America." End of quote. In his August issue, Maybury also talked about Japan and noting that this rising tension with China, that in the last 3 months, the Japanese reported that some 340 times they've had to scramble their jets into its airspace as they were fearful of China encroaching on Japanese airspace. Well, switching to his September issue, Richard Maybury highlighted a problem along the borders of the United States and Mexico. You may recall recently Governor Rick Perry of Texas tried to address this issue, but he was put down by President Obama. Maybury states the following in his August issue. He says, "I believe refugee crisis means big trouble for parts of the United States, but also big profits for those who have the courage not to bury their heads in the sand. The calamity is part of the general global upheaval. As of 2014, we are living in a new world. In my opinion, this year will someday be seen like 1914, the beginning of World War I, and 1939, the beginning of World War II, except it is more chaotic. In both the previous cases," Maybury continues, "the world was divided into two sides. Now it's a free-for-all, dozens of sides, every one of them corrupt, including Washington's buddies." End of quote. Well, pointing out how our leaders conduct their foreign policy, Maybury states the following, which I also believe is true. He says, "First, we jump into conclusions about the war. Second, we get into the war. Third, we discover the conclusions were wrong. Fourth, our CIA stamps on the truth top secrets, thereby not allowing the truth to be told. And fifth, we encourage Hollywood to make movies and TV shows that assume the initial incorrect conclusions were in fact correct." Well, that is exactly what we've been learning from Daniel McAdams of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity has been going on with respect to American propaganda and foreign policy. Continuing on with the September issue, Richard points out, he says that sometimes bad news may be good news. And he states the following. He says, "Most of what we term bad news is simply punishment for unethical behavior. It's nature's way of saying shape up or else." And Richard says this is really crucial in understanding what is going on south of our border. And Richard then goes on to say how you can profit from what is heading in our way in terms of various stocks that provide security within our borders. And you will have, actually, you'll have to buy Richard's newsletter. I'm not going to pass along that information. That wouldn't be fair to Richard, but he has some very good ideas about stocks that provide security devices that probably will come into favor as chaos continues to grow, unfortunately, and most likely within the United States. So I might say that Richard also in his September issue provided some very good information about what the causes are, the geopolitical causes over the years that are now causing South Americans to stream into the border into the United States. And just backing up a second, I might also mention, though, that with respect to Richard's stock picks and economic ideas, he has had a very, very good track record over the years. One of the areas that I have not been comfortable in investing in are defense stocks that are used to what I believe are hit other countries in a needless fashion. But I must say that with respect to defending yourself internally, there may be some interest on my part from a moral perspective to buy some of those kinds of stocks in the near future. Well, Richard goes on to say that this is a huge problem that our politicians are ignoring. That is the one south of our border, on the border line between Mexico and the United States. But then, given the fact that our clueless politicians have really been educated in a socialist system, what else should we expect? Maybury believes that the American public will ultimately demand a major wall be constructed between Mexico and the United States. He says he's not really in favor of it, but he thinks that's what the American people will demand. He said this is going to be a huge, huge capital expenditure, and there will be fortunes to be made in that as well. Now, again, making money in these kinds of ways I find somewhat distasteful, but Maybury is really helping his subscribers to survive the coming problems that we see. And Richard also is very, very much positive, as I noted a little while ago, on his outlook for precious metals as well. Well, getting back to the August issue, I'd like to go back to an idea or two that Richard had there. How did America go wrong? How did we get ourselves into this horrible mess in this world, the problems of this world? And he suggests that it was really the abandonment of the notion of a creator. Well, that came as a bit of a surprise from Richard, from Richard, because I believe that he is a self-proclaimed atheist, and the founders of our country believed in capital C, creator, that is somebody bigger than government. Maybury says in his August issue, says, and I quote, "Probably the most important American principle is expressed in the Declaration of Independence line that says, quote, all men are created equal and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights." Maybury noted that, and I quote, "What government gives, it can take away." Realizing this, the American founders assumed that one's rights to his or her life, freedom, and property come from the Creator and cannot therefore be abridged. In other words, there is a higher law, higher than human law, and governments must obey it. But then this self-evident view of our founders was thrown out the window in the mid-1980s when socialism, with the rise of socialism really in a very major way around the world, socialism held that the answers to man's problems come from government, not from the Creator of the universe. And I truthfully believe that a good portion of the intelligentsia bought into incorrect aspects of evolution to disprove in the minds of most Americans that there is no creator, that in fact that's a falsehood. And so having believed that there is no creator, that set the stage for the intelligentsia to then admit or to look to government and to human beings for the answer. Hence we have the mess that we've gotten ourselves into. So to hear Richard Maybury suggest that, I think, is very interesting. But even if you're not a believer in the Creator or in a God per se, the notion that governments must pay attention to natural law, let's say, and that natural law governs rather than human beings, then there would be the foundation for limited government, which then could lead to freedom. I have, as a Christian, my own views about that, which I will talk about sometime in the future. But continuing on with Maybury, I think he makes a very good point that in fact once you toss out the notion of a creator, then you look to Obama or Stalin or Hitler or Mussolini or whoever, somebody strong-armed man that will provide solutions, quote unquote, and that is the direction that we're heading. By 1900, socialism was well entrenched in the world's intellectual leadership, and of course I think that is really now we have an educational system that is really based on socialism, and it is of course funded by government, which means that government now can perpetuate socialism through that educational process. And as Maybury says, a government-controlled school system makes about as much sense as a government-controlled press, and for the same reasons. Well, that is about all the time I have for this segment. But coming up next, David Jensen will give us the latest on what is really happening in the precious metals markets, with an emphasis this week on the disparity of what Asians are paying for precious metals, especially platinum, palladium, and silver, over what is being quoted on the fraudulent LBMA and COMEX paper markets. Well, this is a very important information, I think, in helping you to keep your eye on the truth about precious metals. Don't allow propaganda that is administered through false pricing on the COMEX and the LBMA to govern your thinking about precious metals. Realize that their demand for the actual precious metals is as strong as it's ever been, and that the price discovery mechanism, which is, I think, intentionally destroyed by the policymakers on the LBMA and the COMEX, should not mislead you into drinking the establishment's Kool-Aid. So go immediately now and listen to my discussion with David Jensen.